September 6, 1997. Westminster Abbey. 2. 5 billion people watching worldwide. Queen Elizabeth II stands before Princess Diana's coffin, and the nation is screaming for her blood. For 6 days, she stayed silent while Britain wept. "Show us you care," the tabloids demanded. Palace advisors whispered, "Ma'am, they want to see you cry." But Elizabeth's face remained stone. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds held signs. She was your daughter-in-law. Inside, Elizabeth watched the television, saw the rage building like a tsunami. William and Harry asked, "Granny, why won't you speak to them?" The decision before her was impossible: bow to Diana's coffin and shatter 1,000 years of protocol, or lose the crown forever. What she did in the next 72 hours didn't just save the monarchy. It rewrote every rule about what a queen could be. And it started with 3 moves nobody saw coming. 4 in the morning, August 31st, Balmoral Castle. The phone on Elizabeth's nightstand rang with the sound that shatters kingdoms. She reached for it in darkness, and the voice, her private secretary, told her Diana was dead in a Paris tunnel. Car crash. Paparazzi chase. Gone at 36. Elizabeth sat upright, hand steady on the receiver. Downstairs, Prince Charles already knew. Upstairs, William and Harry slept, 15 and 12, unaware their mother had just been erased from the world. Elizabeth's first thought wasn't protocol. It was protection. Keep the boys here, away from cameras, away from the feeding frenzy that would consume London by sunrise. But Diana wasn't just another royal death. In 1981, 750 million people watched her marry Charles. A fairy tale wedding with that sapphire engagement ring catching light like a promise. The divorce in 1996 shattered that promise, and the public blamed Elizabeth's coldness. Now Diana was gone, and that ring symbolized everything the monarchy had lost. Mourning broke across Britain, and the news spread like wildfire. Diana, dead. The people's princess, gone. Elizabeth remained at Balmoral, 500 miles from the chaos erupting in London. Her logic was iron. Keep William and Harry in Scotland, surrounded by family, shielded from the madness. Charles flew to Paris to retrieve Diana's body. In London, flowers began piling at the palace gates, thousands, then tens of thousands. Elizabeth watched it on television from Balmoral's drawing room. Crowds weeping, strangers embracing. The question on every channel: where is the Queen? The palace issued a statement, brief, formal, cold as marble. The public's reaction was immediate fury. Tony Blair, the new prime minister, called Diana the people's princess in a speech that made Elizabeth wince. It wasn't his place to eulogize royalty, but he understood what she didn't yet. This death was different. Palace advisors whispered into phones, their voices tight with worry. "Ma'am," they said, "this is different." She heard them. She didn't listen. Not yet. September 2nd and 3rd. The pressure became unbearable. 1 million bouquets covered the palace grounds. Tabloids screamed in 72-point font, "Show us you care." Elizabeth faced an impossible conflict: duty versus emotion, protocol versus people. Charles and senior advisors pushed her. "You must speak. You must return to London." Elizabeth resisted. "I am their grandmother first," she said, meaning William and Harry. But the boys were watching television too. They saw the anger directed at their grandmother. Palace staff called with reports from London. "Ma'am, they're turning on you." Then came the twist that changed everything. A private poll, kept from the media, showed 25% of Britons now favored abolishing the monarchy entirely. 25% wanted a republic. In 1 week. Elizabeth stared at those numbers and realized this wasn't about Diana anymore. It was about the crown itself. The sapphire ring flashed on every television screen. Diana in archival footage, laughing, alive. Elizabeth made 3 decisions in the next hour. 3 moves that would either save the monarchy or destroy it. September the 3rd. Elizabeth did the unthinkable. She left Balmoral and returned to London. The first breach of protocol. Royal tradition held that she should remain in Scotland during private mourning, maintain distance, let the institution speak through official channels. Instead, she ordered her motorcade prepared. The drive from the airport took her directly through the crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace. Hundreds of thousands of people lined the streets, clutching flowers, many weeping openly. Then, Elizabeth made her second breach. She ordered the car to stop. Her security detail tensed, but she was already moving. The Queen of England stepped out of her vehicle and walked among her subjects for the first time in a crisis like this. She moved slowly through the sea of bouquets, bending to touch arrangements, reading cards addressed to Diana. The crowd fell silent, shock rippling outward. Then, spontaneously, they began applauding. Not cheering, applauding, a sound of respect and relief. Photographers captured the moment. Elizabeth in black, surrounded by flowers meant for someone else, her face controlled but present. A woman approached, middle-aged, tear-streaked, and handed Elizabeth a bouquet. "For Diana," the woman said. Elizabeth accepted it. In that gesture, she shattered 50 years of carefully maintained distance. Back in the car, her hands trembled slightly as she held the flowers. Her private secretary saw it, said nothing. Elizabeth looked out the window at the masses of grieving people and said quietly, "One down, 2 to go." Nobody asked what she meant. They would find out soon enough. The flag crisis erupted within hours. British law was clear. The royal standard flew over Buckingham Palace only when the monarch was in residence. It never flew at half-mast, never, not for anyone. The public was demanding something unprecedented. The Union Jack raised over the palace and lowered to half-mast for Diana. Elizabeth's advisors split down the middle. Traditionalists insisted the law couldn't be broken. Modernizers warned that refusal would trigger a constitutional crisis. Tony Blair called personally, his voice urgent, "Ma'am, the people need this." Elizabeth faced her internal war. 50 years of protocol versus 1 week of rage. Every instinct told her to hold the line, maintain tradition, let the institution stand firm. But those poll numbers haunted her. 25% wanted the monarchy abolished. She made the decision that rewrote centuries of precedent. Break the law. On September 4th, she gave the order. Raise the Union Jack. Lower it to half-mast. For Diana. For the first time in British history, the flag would honor someone who wasn't even a royal anymore. Diana had lost her HRH title in the divorce. The announcement went public at noon. The nation gasped. Then came the twist nobody expected. Elizabeth insisted on raising the flag herself. At 8 in the morning, before most of London woke, she walked onto the palace roof with 2 footmen and personally helped raise the Union Jack. Then she watched as they lowered it to half-mast, the fabric descending in the gray morning light. Below, crowds who'd camped overnight at the gates saw her silhouette against the sky and began to cheer. The ice wasn't just cracking, it was breaking apart. September 5th, the day before Diana's funeral. Elizabeth prepared to commit her 3rd breach, a live broadcast to the nation. Queens didn't do this. They didn't speak to the public about personal matters, didn't address domestic crises with direct emotional appeals. They issued statements through intermediaries. But Elizabeth understood now. Silence would kill the monarchy faster than any scandal. Speechwriters drafted formal condolences, the usual bloodless language of official mourning. Elizabeth read it once and rewrote the entire thing by hand. She added 2 words that changed everything. As a grandmother. The speech would acknowledge Diana's impact, validate the public's grief, and, most dangerously, reveal Elizabeth's own feelings. Rehearsals began in a palace drawing room. Charles watched, offering quiet notes. "Mother," he said at one point, "they need to see you feel this." Elizabeth's discipline had been forged over 7 decades. Showing vulnerability went against every lesson she'd learned about monarchy. At 6 p.m., 200 million people across the UK tuned in. Elizabeth appeared on screen in a black dress, her composure intact, but something different in her eyes. "I want to pay tribute to Diana myself," she began. She was an exceptional and gifted human being. Then came the line, that shifted everything. "Speaking to you as your queen and as a grandmother." Her voice cracked slightly on the word grandmother. Calculated or genuine, nobody could tell. She acknowledged Diana's ability to connect with people, spoke of the public's loss, validated their grief. When the broadcast ended, palace switchboards flooded with calls. Not rage, support. The temperature had changed. Elizabeth had broken protocol to save the institution protocol was meant to protect. September 5th and 6th. William and Harry became the focus. Elizabeth sat with her grandsons in private, away from cameras and advisors. "You must walk behind the coffin," she told them gently. William, 15 and angry, challenged her. "Why do they need to see us cry?" he asked. Elizabeth's answer was honest, in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. Because she was theirs too. She showed them cards pulled from the ocean of flowers outside. Messages from strangers who felt they knew Diana, who grieved her as family. "Your mother touched millions," Elizabeth said. Harry, 12 and shattered, held a photograph of Diana, unable to speak. Elizabeth made a promise in that moment she would protect them, but she would also let the nation grieve. The boys would walk in the funeral procession, but Prince Philip would walk beside them. The world would see the royal family united in loss, human in their pain. Then came her most controversial decision. Elizabeth announced she would walk part of the funeral route herself. The palace was horrified. The Queen never walked in public funerals. She rode in cars, maintained dignified distance, represented the institution rather than participating in spectacle. But Elizabeth had learned something in the past 6 days. The institution meant nothing if the people abandoned it. Her private secretary tried one last protest. "Ma'am, it's never been done." Elizabeth's response was simple. "Neither has any of this." On the night before the funeral, she walked to the chapel royal where Diana's coffin rested. She stood alone before it, remembering the young woman who'd joined the family 16 years earlier, full of hope and naivete and an ability to connect that Elizabeth had never possessed. September 5th evening. Elizabeth stood in the chapel royal, alone with Diana's coffin. The sapphire engagement ring had become a question of inheritance. William wanted it for his future wife, whenever that day came. Elizabeth held the ring in her palm, remembering the 1981 wedding, Diana emerging from the glass coach, that dress, that ring catching sunlight, 750 million people watching a fairy tale begin. Diana's impact had been seismic. She'd modernized the monarchy, made it accessible, brought it into tabloids and hearts. Then she'd threatened to destroy it entirely through divorce, interviews, and unstoppable popularity that eclipsed the crown itself. Elizabeth whispered to the empty chapel, "I underestimated you." The coffin was draped in the royal standard, Elizabeth's personal authorization, another break from tradition for a divorced former royal. 3 wreaths rested on top. The smallest was from William and Harry, the card reading simply, "Mummy." Elizabeth read it and felt her composure crack. This was the cost of duty, the distance it required, the warmth it forbade, the failures it created in families trying to be both human and symbolic. She'd failed Diana. She knew that now. Failed to protect her from the machine of monarchy, failed to teach Charles how to love her, failed to understand that the public didn't want marble gods anymore. They wanted people. But she wouldn't fail William and Harry. In a gesture nobody witnessed, Elizabeth placed a handwritten note inside the coffin, tucked beside Diana's hands. The contents of that note have never been revealed. Only Elizabeth knew what final words she offered the woman who'd challenged everything she represented. Tomorrow, 2.5 billion people would watch her gamble the crown on 3 impossible choices. Tonight, she mourned alone. September 6th. Funeral day. London's streets filled with 1 million people in absolute silence. The procession route stretched from Kensington Palace to Westminster Abbey. Elizabeth had made her most shocking decision. She would bow to Diana's coffin as it passed. Monarchs never bowed to subjects. Not ever. 1,000 years of protocol said the crown bowed to no one. The procession began. William, Harry, Prince Philip, Charles, and Diana's brother walking behind the gun carriage. Diana's name spelled in white roses. Elizabeth's car followed, and she watched her grandsons' backs, rigid with grief and duty. Crowds threw flowers. Strangers wept openly. The gun carriage reached Buckingham Palace gates. Elizabeth's car stopped. She stepped out. The coffin passed, and she bowed her head. Cameras captured it. Every news network carried the image. Queen Elizabeth II, head lowered, paying respect to the people's princess. The gesture wasn't commanded by advisors or choreographed by palace staff. It was instinctive, human, real. In that moment, she chose the people over protocol. The nation saw it and understood. Their queen had changed. The monarchy had changed. And it happened because one woman bent the crown rather than let it break. Inside Westminster Abbey, 2.5 billion people watched globally. Elton John performed a rewritten Candle in the Wind, his voice breaking on the final chorus. Diana's brother, Earl Spencer, delivered a eulogy that carried veiled criticism of the royal family's treatment of his sister. Elizabeth sat in the front row, face impassive, listening to every word. The tension in the Abbey was electric. Would the royal family react? Charles stared ahead, jaw tight. William and Harry cried openly. Then Elizabeth did something small but significant. Her hand reached across to William's shoulder, a gesture of comfort captured by cameras positioned throughout the Abbey. Grandmother to grandson. Human to human. The service ended. The coffin was carried out to continue its journey to Althorpe, where Diana would be buried on a private island. Elizabeth stood with her family, presenting a united front to the watching world. The twist became clear within hours. Morning polls taken before the funeral showed 25% of Britons favored abolishing the monarchy. Evening polls taken after Elizabeth's bow showed 70% now supported the crown. One gesture, one moment of humanity. It saved an institution that had survived for over 1,000 years by learning, finally, to bend. September 6th and 7th. Diana was buried at Althorpe, her family's estate, on an island in the middle of an ornamental lake. Elizabeth returned to Balmoral to decompress from the week that had redefined her reign. She reviewed the choices. 3 protocol breaches, 1 survival. The sapphire ring went to William, who would use it in 2010 to propose to Kate Middleton, bringing Diana's symbol full circle. In private, Elizabeth reflected on what Diana had taught her, that the public needed accessibility, needed to see emotion, needed their leaders to be human rather than symbolic. The monarchy had modernized in 1 week out of sheer necessity. But the cost was real. Elizabeth's private grief was never expressed publicly. Letters revealed years later show she wept alone at Balmoral, away from cameras and courtiers. The public saw control. The family saw what it cost her. The greatest victory was invisible. Elizabeth sacrificed her own emotional expression to save the institution through calculated displays of carefully measured feeling. She'd saved the monarchy by breaking its rules. She'd remained queen by learning to be a grandmother first. The Ice Queen had melted just enough. Not too much. Just exactly enough to survive. Weeks after the funeral, Elizabeth remained at Balmoral, processing the week that changed everything. The monarchy survived, but she'd aged visibly. Private letters show her doubt. Did I do enough? But her relationship with William and Harry deepened. They'd seen her break protocol for them, seen her choose their needs over institutional tradition. Public perception shifted from cold to protective. Yet Diana's ghost remained. Every royal decision would now be measured against the question, what would Diana do? Elizabeth accepted it with characteristic pragmatism. She won, even in death, she told a close friend. But there was one detail that haunted her. Elizabeth kept 1 bouquet from the million left at palace gates. The card attached read, "Thank you for loving her too." She never said who it was from, never explained why she kept it. Divi tukstoshi vien padsmitais. William proposed to Kate Middleton with Diana's sapphire engagement ring. Elizabeth watched the announcement on television, remembering 1981, remembering 1997, remembering everything the ring represented. It had come full circle, from rebellion to continuity, from threat to legacy. Kate wore it as both Diana's memory and Elizabeth's blessing. The monarchy survived because Elizabeth learned Diana's lesson. People need humanity, not just duty. September 1997 was the week that killed the people's princess. It was also the week that saved the crown. When Elizabeth died in 2022, the nation mourned her the way they'd mourned Diana, because she'd finally let them in. The sapphire ring remained in the family. The crown stayed on her head. And the lesson? That never left. She'd bent the rules just enough to survive, and in bending, became unbreakable.